Hello, welcome back to the video, and in this video we will be looking how to deploy Netlify Cloud functions using Golang. So Netlify Cloud functions are like an API endpoint which we can run as this is request and response function, or maybe more complex we can add it in the background job as well. So with Netlify Cloud functions we can write with JavaScript, TypeScript or Go and just drop it into any project folder with the Netlify/functions folder, and we can basically run it as an API endpoint. For deploying, we can either use GitHub integrations or deploy it from Netlify CLI. And to run it, we can either run directly with the URL or trigger from a webhook or use it as a background job. So some the use cases are like fetching real-time data, which we can just grab it from the URL cloud functions, or dynamically load images or validate user input on the server side. So with Netlify Cloud Functions, we can configure where we want to put the function, the actual logic to run the code, and then use it as a single URL to hit that endpoint and run the code. So by appending dash background, we can also create that function into an asynchronous function that can run in the background with up to 15 minutes of runtime. Also, we can deploy Netlify Cloud Functions using Netlify CLI, which is a really handy way to deploy it using the local setup and push it directly on the cloud. So this is the overview of Netlify Cloud Functions that helps us in deploying code without hosting a server. It's like open up a world of possibilities, like allow us to run code on demand, which without setting up a server. So this is one of the advantages of using cloud functions. And Netlify Cloud Functions with Golang have some advantages that we can use the AWS lambda functions, which are lambda compatible like API, which uses to create those cloud functions. So to create a cloud function in Golang, we need to create a specific file in a specific folder location. So which will be our base directory /netlify/functions, and then there will be a directory with that function name and any file within that folder will be served as a cloud function. And that cloud function also need to so this cloud function will be hosted on a specific URL, that is your Netlify app.netlify/functions and the name of the cloud function. And for creating the actual function, we need to follow the AWS Lambda uh, compatible API, which is to use the handler. So with lambda.start and providing the handler, we can we can create a simple lambda function. So that handler takes in a request and returns a request and a response or a error. So that's the boilerplate code for AWS Lambda compatible APIs. So that's how we will be using this to create cloud functions with Golang. So we can also have background functions which by appending dash background into the function name, and that will be served as a background cloud function. So we need to set certain environment variables, which is Go version, which will be 1.20 or any other version that is supportable on the Golang uh, stable versions. The build config will automatically be set from the Netlify deployment. We don't have to provide any configurations. So for function deployment, the default directory is Netlify/functions. That could be overwritten from the configuration or from the netlify.toml directory. You can read a lot about the documentation from Netlify talks.netlify.com. So let's get started by creating a hello world Netlify Cloud function in Golang. So first we'll create a folder called Netlify slash functions. So inside of Netlify we'll create a folder called functions, and inside of that we need to create a folder with the name of that function that we want to create. So in this case I'm creating hello. It could be your function name, and in the function folder that is hello we'll create a file called main.go. So we need to also initialize the module, but we need to initialize this module outside the Netlify function. So wherever we are creating the function, then where there we need to initialize the go module. Once we have initialized the module, we can create we can start writing the actual functions code. So we need to navigate into Netlify slash functions slash hello and slash main.go. So this is a function which we will be used to create the function. So once we are into the file editor, we'll create the handler which will take in the request, and we need to import AWS lambda slash go, which is the SDK for creating lambda functions. So once we have imported the required modules, we can start writing the handler function which will take in the request as the API gateway proxy request and return API gateway proxy response and or an error. So if everything is fine, because this won't have any error, so we'll simply return events dot API gateway proxy response, which takes in status code as the field and the body. So this will be just a simple string response and error will be nil. So once we have that, we can inside the main function we can call lambda.start and provide the handler function, which will be the cloud function required in this module. So we'll need to install AWS Lambda dash Go, which is the SDK for Lambda functions in Golang. Once that is installed, we can go ahead to the next step, which is to create a GitHub repository. So now we can create a GitHub repository. I'm using GHCLI. So GH repo create will create the repository on GitHub. So I'll name my repository Netlify Go demo, and I'll provide a description demo for Netlify Cloud function or functions with Golang. It will be a public. I don't want a git ignore for now. Not a license. Yeah, so this will create the repository. I don't want to clone the repository because I have already created the repository. I'll just initialize the git repository, and I'll rename the branch to master from master to main. And now I need to add. So I'll also add the origin, which will be from the GitHub. So I'll open github.com/ my username and the repository that I created, and I copy the SSH URL. So this will set the origin. Now I can push it into the repository, but first I need to commit. So first I'll add the go.mod, go.sum, and the function file that we created. So that is added, and simply commit this changes and provide the message. And once that is done, I also need to also add the user, because I've not set the user globally. I set it manually here, as I also not as also have not cloned the repository myself. So I'll just add the user name and the email. Um, so once I have added, we can commit this file, and then we can push the changes to the repository. Git push origin main, pushing the uh, main branch into the origin, which is branch from repository from on GitHub. So once I have pushed the repository and all changes are there, we can create an Netlify project and deploy this repository into as a cloud function. So we'll deploy and first we need to provide which file, which repository I am looking for. So I need to configure the GitHub application on Netlify. So I'll provide access to that repository. I usually prefer selecting only the repositories that you have access to just to be safe. There's nothing harm in that, but yeah, let's be precise and provide the file for repository. And once we have created that, we'll keep the defaults and we need to add the environment variable, which is go underscore version, which will be set to my current working version. I keep this only because the go.sum file will mess up if you change the version of it. Make sure you keep the versions intact and keep the go.mod file and go.sum file in sync with the versions that you are using on Netlify as well as on locally. So functions directory we can configure that, but we'll keep it default as Netlify slash functions and hit deploy. So once it is started to deploy, we can see the logs on the build logs. So this will be up in a moment. So as you can see, the site is getting deployed and it is almost on the build stage. Once the build is completed, you can see that it has deployed one function, and inside of build log we can see it has picked up hello slash main.go file. That will be the function file that will be hosted on this endpoint. So we can see the functions, uh, and here we should see the functions that we have created in this repository. So once that is successfully deployed, we can see the functions. So let's head out to, you can see there is a hello function being created and that is the endpoint. So if we go into this endpoint, you should see hello world being written out as a response. So I'll go manually there and you can see there is indeed hello world as a plain text being printed out. So that is working. So the base directory won't work because I don't have any code for static files in the base directory. I just have this go function, go file main.go. So that will be so the file, the actual route is .netlify slash functions slash the name of the function. You can keep it slash as well just to be just to have shorter URLs. So you can configure the repository of the name repository of the cloud functions. So now try to add try to add up to this function which will take in the name, which will be a request dot query string parameters, and we'll grab the name from the query parameters, and you can see where this is going. So we can just create a string the using a fmt.printf that will just use a placeholder as the name. So we'll dynamically display the output using query parameters. So I'll copy this code in a separate function, which I'll call it uh, greet. So let's create a file or a function, a folder with called as greet, and here we'll create the file called main.go again. This could be any file name, but I'm keeping a convention to keep it main.go. So once I've created the file, You can see, okay, so the greet folder is not created. Let me create that with uh, $mkdir netlify functions, and I'll create the greet folder. Once it is created and I save this file, this should be saved. So once that is done, I'll again add this into git. So I'll add the changes. So let me add git netlify functions greet main.go. So I'll just add greet and main.go. That should add the file. So once that is added, we can commit and push the changes. So git push origin main should push into the Netlify cloud. This should push to the GitHub, and this will be picked up as a GitHub integration. So once you can see, this was the hello function that we created. Now we'll see greet the name as meet, and if I try to hit this endpoint once this is deployed, so you can see this function has started to build, and once the build is complete for this function, we can see the outputs as well. So here we will have two functions created now, which is hello and greet. And if we hit this endpoint function slash greet with the query parameter name set as meet, and we change this, so you can see hello comma meet is being printed, and change this variables hello John, so that is dynamic. So in that is indeed working correctly. And you have seen here we have two functions being deployed. That's how we deploy Netlify cloud functions in Golang. Thank you. I'll see you in the next one.